They followed the eastern river path on the other side of the mountains, stopping to eat or drink from the waters there, but Endo realized that it didn't seem to matter which river path they took. The plains began to narrow, and to the far west, he could see the other river flowing too. He suspected that they led to the same body of water far to the south where the rivers would surely meet. He didn't immediately have the opportunity to confirm his suspicions, though, as they came to oddly shaped trees further south. While laughing at the perplexed expression on his face, Sahad informed him that they were called huts, and this was the area in which he lived. They had made it to Sid. Sahad had left Horse with the other creatures of his kind, and then led Endo immediately to his home. Every building was shaped from wood similar to the trees from the jungle. Not every building looked to be a home, though. There were larger buildings, some that were 2 or 3 stories tall, and had crowds of people both inside and hanging around the outside. They followed the dirt path around these buildings to the outskirts of the village to Sahad's home. The door to the hut was opened by a man who looked like an older version of Sahad. He'd immediately given Endo a curious look before speaking, though Endo wasn't sure what he was saying. The older man took Endo and Sahad inside and spoke to the latter while Endo watched the flames dance in the fireplace. There seemed to be no end to the surprises in store for Endo. Everything was so new and only getting more and more interesting by the day. He was fed and sheltered by the older man, who Endo learned was Abe, Sahad's father. It took some time for Endo to understand what the relation meant, as he didn't seem to have a father. He didn't really have any relatives that he knew of, and he wasn't sure how to feel about this. He didn't necessarily grieve, as there was nobody to grieve for, but Sahad had great respect for his father, and Endo felt that he too desired that level of respect from the both of them. Endo had slept and eaten at Abe and Sahad's hut for multiple days. 4, as he learned in that short time span. Sahad had been teaching him as much as he could, and Endo appeared to be gaining knowledge at an immense speed. It's definitely taking time to come back, but in less than 2 weeks of traveling together, you've already learned so much, said Sahad at the end of their day's lesson. It feels so natural to me now, as if I've been using these skills forever, replied Endo. His speaking skills had already improved at a remarkable speed. I've been thinking, said Sahad seriously. What if you actually aren't learning anything new at all? What if you're learning so quickly because you're simply remembering a language you've forgotten? Endo took this into consideration, and after losing himself in thought, he said to Sahad, but that still doesn't explain why I can't remember anything before waking up in the jungle. Sahad gave Endo a shrug. Maybe it'll come back to you. Talk to the people here and learn from them. Maybe you'll start to remember more. Endo learned that Sahad was a trapper, and his father Abe was a hunter. On some days, Endo would walk out into the plains with Sahad, looking for smaller animals to capture, but for the most part his job was to defend the village against attacks from wild beasts. This is normally a job for 3 or 4 skilled archers, but Endo seemed to be another separate breed of strength. He was able to completely defend the village against any of the threats they had come across, and dispatch them with similar methods he acquired while surviving in his jungle home. This made him a hero in the eyes of the villagers around him, and they regarded him as a great warrior in Sid. Don't let him go exploring into the plains. He has a nasty habit of venturing too far north, Abe had told Endo while Sahad looked toward the ground embarrassed. Abe was heading into the big city to pay Sid's meat tax to the king. Sahad and Endo were to head back into the plains for a few days to look for more animals to feed the town while Abe was gone. They had to be back within 5 days, though, as Abe needed Sahad and Endo's help once he returned. What do you think your father wants from us when we get back? Endo said to Sahad on their first night into the plains. I'm not sure. He's never asked me to do much more than get food for the village. This looked to be quite a source of shame for Sahad, as he got very quiet after announcing this. Are you going to be a hunter like your father when you reach manhood? Endo asked Sahad. This had been the wrong thing to ask, as Sahad had simply rolled over and pretended to sleep. The next morning they set further north into the plains, past the mountains and rivers they saw on the way to Sid. They walked in silence during the day while they hunted for their meat. It wasn't until dusk when Sahad had finally spoken. I don't think my father will ever recognize me as a hunter. Certainly not a hunter worthy of respect. Sahad received a surprised look from Endo before continuing on. I know I can be a great hunter if he stops seeing me as a helpless child. Put a bow in my hand and I can bring Sid its greatest catch yet. Endo wasn't sure if he believed this to be completely true, as Sahad still seemed quite young and inexperienced, though he did find his passion and determination admirable. Give him time, Sahad. You'll prove to him that you can be a capable hunter. With your motivation, it'll only be a matter of time before you and I will be defending Sid from monsters and beasts together. This seemed to cheer Sahad up, and they awoke the next morning refreshed and ready for their last day heading north into the plains. Endo had decided to begin teaching Sahad how to hunt around midday. He felt that he owed it to Sahad after all that he had taught him. Though they didn't catch anything that day, Sahad was elated that he was going to show his father all that he was learning. They began to make their way back to Sid after spending their days hunting when they could, then laying out their traps and sleeping around their tent at night. On their second to last day in the plains, they had finally managed to hunt a medium-sized deer, and Sahad would be bringing it back to his father as a sign of good fortune for the village. They carried it past the mountains and along the river leading to Sid, a large smile planted on Sahad's face the entire time. But while they had arrived on time, it seemed that Abe had not. Sahad was certainly worried, but he wasn't the only one. Abe and his family were well respected throughout the village, and it was unlike Abe to arrive so late. They spent the entire day at Sahad's hut when it started to rain hard, and Abe hadn't returned. It was very early in the stormy morning, well before the sun began to light the sky, when some sort of commotion began stirring in the village. Endo and Sahad opened the door to a frenzied Abe, but he wasn't alone. Next to him was a woman, who looked just as concerned as Abe did. She looked to be between the ages of Sahad and Abe, probably around Endo's age. She had crystal blue eyes that reminded him of the streams he had drank from during his time in the jungle, and brunette hair, just slightly lighter than his own. He had seen other women around the village, but never before had he felt like this. At the behest of Abe, she was given a blanket and a seat by the fire while Sahad and Endo gawked at her. When she looked to be warm, Abe's attention was turned to Sahad. "Get the village elder." "Now?" "Yes, right now," exclaimed Abe while Sahad rushed out the door. Endo stood perplexed. He had no idea what was going on. A short while later, the door opened once again, and a rain-soaked Sahad entered with a much older man. "Hakim, we have much to discuss," said Abe to the village elder before adding, "Sahad, I need you now to go see the innkeeper and get our guests some food. This woman hasn't eaten much in days. Endo, please go make her a bed out in the farmhouse. I don't want either of you speaking to anyone you run across who isn't from the village, understood? Now go." They didn't need any more convincing. They sped out the door and ran in opposite directions toward their destinations. Endo made it to the farmhouse extremely quick, and took the time to make her a comfortable hay bed to the best of his ability. He had a strange feeling that Abe didn't want him or Sahad to overhear his conversation with Hakim, the village elder. But with his goal accomplished, he didn't know where else to go than back to his hut. He supposed that Abe probably wanted him to go to the inn to meet with Sahad, but his curiosity had gotten the better of him. He approached Abe and Sahad's hut stealthily, where the door was left open. It seems they wanted to know when the pair would be returning, and the sound of the storm was doing a brilliant job of drowning out the conversation. Endo stood against the wall near the door and listened closely. The first voice he heard clearly was Abe's. "Every time I make the trip, he demands more. At this rate, we're expected to give him more food than we can even hunt for ourselves here. We won't last another winter if this goes on." The storm raged on, drowning out more of his words. It seemed that the elder was only listening raptly, letting Abe finish telling him his travels. The next he heard after a particularly loud thunderblast was Abe's voice again. He makes them work through day and night, and when one collapses from exhaustion, he just replaces them with another. The ages of the young men grow younger and younger too. Another large blast of thunder shook the hut. He's become a total tyrant. Blast. Rain and thunder pounded around Endo, vibrating into his skull. And that's not the worst part. He's enacted the Aladat. Endo didn't understand that word, but Hakim, the village elder's reaction, enlightened him that it was something very awful. "And this girl is..." "No, but the king wants her all the same, meaning she's in great danger. I'm a seer." This voice belonged to the woman. There was a long pause following this. Hakim seemed to be at a loss for words. When he finally found his voice, he whispered, "What did you see?" What the seer saw, Endo didn't get to hear, as Sahad had slipped right past him into the door, his hands full of meat and fruit. Endo followed behind, sopping wet and at a complete loss for words. This woman was clearly in danger, but any context to be added was lost at his and Sahad's appearance. They didn't appear to be interested in continuing the conversation at this time. Hours had passed, though the rain hadn't stopped beating down onto the roof hut where Endo lay awake. He heard rustling around him and realized that Abe was awake as well. He had just come in from the farmhouse where the seer was sleeping. It was clear to Endo that she was being hidden in there, kept safe from whoever seemed to be after her. Abe took notice of Endo and sighed heavily before taking a seat beside him. He looked over to assure himself that Sahad was sound asleep before speaking to Endo. "You have been so helpful to us, Endo, and we are forever in your debt. You have kept this town safe from attack, letting our men focus on growing our defenses. This is why it pains me that after all that you have done for us, I must ask to be a burden on you once again." Endo looked confidently at Abe. "I will do anything you ask. You have sheltered me and helped to teach me how to be civilized. If it weren't for you and Sahad, I would still be in the jungle, half-starved and cold." "This woman in the farmhouse, she's in danger, Endo. She might be safe here tonight, but she cannot stay here. Despite our wishes for her to move further east, she'll be leaving in the morning and heading to Mortu in the southwest," said Abe hurriedly. He didn't show any signs of even having heard Endo. "You would like me to escort her there?" said Endo. "Yes, but Sahad must not know, as he will surely try to accompany you." She has requested that you personally escort her, and this is why she wants to go to Mortu. She's a seer, you see, someone who reads prophecy and sees glimpses of the future. She's taken a great interest in you, and I think she believes that you will play a key part in the God's plan for the betterment of us all.